A young running back for TCU made waves last season. How will the Frogs use him this year? We'll talk about that next as our X Factor series continues, talking about TCU football. All that and more coming up on Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, Locked On Horned Frogs. It is your team every day. I'm your host, Stephen Simcox. You can find me on Twitter at SimcoxSteven. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are approaching 700 subscribers on YouTube, which is outstanding. I appreciate you guys subscribing. I'm also available wherever it is you get your podcast in its audio form. We're going to continue our series about X factors for the TCU football season. We've been doing this now since last week. We talked about Marcel Brooks on the defensive end. Also mentioned DeAndre Rogers, the tight end, Jalen Robinson, the wide receiver transfer coming over from Ole Miss, had a big season at UCF, a few years back. And we'll do two more. So today's going to be offense, tomorrow's going to be defense. And some of you have been contributing, which you can always do that in the comment section on YouTube, or you can tweet at me at Simcox Stevens, my Twitter handle. The show is at Locked On TCU. Somebody mentioned Jalen Robinson. I talked about him. Another name that was mentioned was Avery Helm. Here's the thing about Avery Helm. I think he can be great for this team. I don't really feel like I'm talking more about under the radar players. And while Avery might be under the radar to some TCU fans just because they don't know a lot about him, he was a really successful cornerback at Florida. And I feel like he's the guy that's going to step into the spot that Trey Hodges-Tomlinson left and do a fantastic job. It's kind of crazy to say, could somebody come in and win the Thorpe Award? But when you look at the numbers that he put up in coverage while he was at Florida, this is a lockdown type defender. So I have high expectations for Avery Helm. I think he's going to be fantastic for TCU. I don't really consider him a player that in my mind is under the radar. I just think he's a really good player and a very talented young man that TCU was able to grab in the portal. It's going to be huge for them on the defensive side of the ball. I went back and forth with this pick. So one guy that I spotlighted last year, and I'm laughing because I was actually texting with Reese Gordon today, and he was on the show a few weeks back, or it might have been a few months back now. Anyway, we were talking about TCU baseball at the time, and Reese was very critical of Kirk Saarloos. And so he was saying, like, hey, I'd love to come back on the show and we can talk about what happened. And that's true. And, like, I'm not making fun of him at all because I've made plenty of takes on the show. I've said plenty of things that at the time sounded right and then ended up not being true. It's just part of the business. It's part of doing this and having opinions on a daily basis. So these things happen. And, of course, everybody's excited about the turnaround that TCU baseball has had. But a few months ago, we were all looking at this thing and saying, man, I'm not sure if this team is even going to sneak in the tournament. This looks pretty grim. However, last year, I was doing sort of a similar series where I was just kind of spotlighting some guys that I think might be under the radar. And one player that I mentioned was Corey Wren. And Corey is a young player who spent a few years at Florida State and was an exciting talent for them. They didn't really use him on the offensive side of the ball, but he was effective in special teams. Kickoff return, punt return. And he probably wouldn't have been much of a factor on special teams last year, maybe in the kick return game. But Darius Davis was so electric at that punt return position that I don't think he would have found his way in the lineup. Because of injuries, though, Corey didn't really end up being a factor at all. Now, I don't know where he's at this year, but I thought about mentioning him again because he is a very explosive player, great athlete. And I do feel like, he's one of the many guys. There's a lot of really good athletes on this offense. And that have potential, and you wonder, like, okay, could you find a way to get them a few touches a game and see if they can hit a home run? Like I was talking about with Jalen Robinson the other day. It's not necessarily a player that you have to force feed the ball and get 10 targets. It's just if you can occasionally see if you can stretch the field, that could be a big advantage for you. And there's opportunity at that wide receiver position with everything that TCU lost from last season. But I ended up going with Trent Battle, and Trent Battle made some big plays last year. I was actually pretty shocked when I looked at his stats because he had 9 carries for 38 yards and 7 receptions for 91 yards. But it felt like he had a bigger impact on the team than that. He had some big catches in that game against Baylor, had a nice catch in the Big 12 championship game against K-State on the sideline where he kind of reached behind him. And they primarily used him on swing routes, in some action in the passing game out of the backfield. Really athletic player. One guy that was mentioned as a potential X factor for this TCU team in the comment section on YouTube, one of our viewers, Tanner McKinney, he was like, I really think Cam Cook is going to be an X factor for this team. And I want to talk more about Cam Cook in our viewer questions segment later on in the show. However, I'm going to focus on Trent Battle here. And the thing about Trent is I don't really think he's built to be a guy that's going to run between the tackles and get 20 carries a game. That's just not who he is. But they found creative ways to use him last season. With Kendall Browse now as the offense coordinator, I think there's more ways that you can involve him in the offense. Now, he's not a huge guy. He's got a pretty slight build. We'll see what Kyle Skazati and that strength and conditioning staff helped him do in the offseason. He might be more beefed up now. He's a shifty player, though. He's an explosive player. And last season, he was very reliable at catching the ball and then making plays at the field. I think he's somebody that they can use as a running back. I think he's somebody that they can use in that slot position. But he could be a good change of pace. And the running back spot is one of those positions that I didn't come out of spring camp just overly impressed. I think there's some talent there. I think there's some pieces, but there's not one player that has just really taken that job and run with it. No pun intended. And it does feel like one of the positions on the team that we're going to find out a lot about throughout the first few weeks of the season. Overall, it might end up just being something that's done by committee, but hopefully someone eventually emerges, because even though more and more teams are interchangeable now at that running back position and will have 2 or 3 guys that might tote the rock, I still think it is at its best when you have a bell cow type player. Amari DiMercado was great in relief of Kendre Miller. He was a great change of pace back last year, but Kendre Miller was the main guy. He was the guy that was going to get the ball in big time situations, provided that he was healthy. So I don't know who that's going to be. I'm not sure if it's going to be Trey Sanders. And I was impressed with Trey Sanders. I liked his patience when he was running the ball in that spring game. I'm not sure it's going to be Amani Bailey. Amani's more of a home run threat. We saw him hit, the hole with a lot of explosiveness and with a lot of authority during the season. But last season when Amani got the ball, I think it's worth noting it was mainly late in games in sort of garbage time, if you will. And he was impressive, and he had a really nice career at Louisiana while he was there. But I think there's a big difference between, running between the tackles and trying to make plays during the game when it's highly contested and it's a high leverage situation versus games already in hand, defense is on their heels a little bit, defensive line sucking wind, and there's sort of this attitude of, all right, let's get this game over with. And so I want to see Amani in more big-time situations and see what he can bring to the table besides just athleticism and that explosiveness. But I think Trent Battle's a guy. I don't know exactly how they're going to use him, but he's so athletic and he can make plays in a lot of different ways. And I feel like he gives TCU some advantages when they're out there on the field because they can move him around in the offense. He can be effective catching the ball in the backfield. He's also a player that potentially you could put in the receiver position at times. I feel like Trent Battle could be more than just a gadget guy. He could be a true kind of change of pace back. And yes, he's a versatile player. He's a player that you can use in a lot of different situations. But this is not just sort of, toss the ball out to him on a swing pattern once every 2 or 3 games. I hope that he is used more in this offense next season because I think he's earned that opportunity. And I feel like he would be effective with more opportunities in this offense. So I'm fascinated to sort of see where Kendall Browse goes with that. I'm also just really curious to see what that running back position ends up looking like as the season goes on. And we'll talk more about that in segment 3 because I had a question about that, as I mentioned, from one of our viewers, Tanner McKinney. When we come back, we have a game time and a day for TCU baseball, and we'll talk about that next. I do want to mention, though, FanDuel. You see at the bottom there, FanDuel.com/lockedon. You can go there and you can get started. You can sign up. You can take advantage of their no sweat first bet deal. FanDuel.com/lockedon. You can make those bets at FanDuel.com. You can also download their safe, secure, and easy to use app, their mobile app. Safe, secure, and best of all, it's easy to use. It's easy to navigate. FanDuel.com/lockedon. NBA Finals going on tonight. Game 5 happening as I record, so not sure if there will be a Game 6. But even if the NBA season is over, you can bet on MLB games. There are over-under totals for college football and beyond. TCU 7.5 according to FanDuel. I think that's easy money to go on the over. We'll see how that plays out during the season. Maybe don't quote me on that because I don't want to steer you wrong, but I think the Frogs are going to win more than 7 games next season. FanDuel.com/lockedon or they're at FanDuel, where the game starts, official betting partner and sportsbook of the NBA and many other pro leagues, and one of the proud sponsors of the Locked On Network. A lot of you are excited about TCU baseball moving on and making it happen and getting to Omaha. I am too. We have a start time now in a day for game 1, Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock. So get your plans set. If you're going up there, it's going to be a Friday afternoon game. Or if, you have to work, try to shut down the laptop early, get all your work done in an efficient fashion. Because Friday afternoon, TCU will take on Oral Roberts at 1 p.m. I mentioned this yesterday. I am interested to see what Kirk Saarloos does with his pitching staff moving forward. Ultimately, I think, the most likely thing is that Cole Klecker gets to start in game 1. I do wonder if he kind of rolls the dice, though, and goes with Sam Stoutenborough. Sam has been so consistent lately. He's a guy that can give you 5 or 6 innings. And maybe Sam paired with Luke Savage against what is a really good Oral Roberts lineup could get you through game 1 and then give you options in game 2 and beyond when you will face the winner of Florida and Virginia on Sunday. And then we'll see kind of what happens from there, whether the team's in the winner's bracket or the loser's bracket. This pitching staff, the bullpen has really shortened a lot. And part of it is because they haven't necessarily had the need to use everyone. In that super regional, Cole Klecker goes 7 innings in game 1. So you just turn it over to Luke Savage, he gets it done. In game 2, Sam Stoutenborough goes 5 1/3, turn things over to Ben Albert. He wasn't at his sharpest, but he got the job done. And then Garrett Wright in the 9th inning, it's always sort of a roller coaster. Gives up a leadoff single. That second batter hit an absolute rope to center field. Elijah Nunez chased it down, gets a bouncer to second, another pop fly to center, and the game's over. But as far as reliable bullpen arms go right now, you got Luke Savage, you got Ben Abelt, Garrett Wright in the 9th inning to close games out. And I don't really think we'll see what happens. It's going to be all hands on deck at times. It's a lot of games in a lot of days, especially if you drop one of those first 2 games. But I really think Garrett Wright is a 1-inning guy. I don't love the idea of him getting 4 or 5 out saves. He did that a few times this year. 6 out saves. I'm just not feeling it. But those are really the 3 kind of main arms now. Now you have some other options. Cohen Feaster is a player that's been effective for them at times. They used Mason Speaker in the regional, but that was really at the end of the game, like sort of mop-up duty type situation. Jax Traeger's out there. There's just not a lot of arms that they have used. Now, they can sort of get away with it because Savage and Abelt are guys that are able to give them multiple innings. But it's not a super deep bullpen. And you need to they're going to ask their starters to go deeper in games. They're going to ask this bullpen to give them multiple innings. And I think Kirk will mix and match more in the College World Series because Super Regional is essentially just a weekend series. And so you use who you got, and there's no need to necessarily dip into, guy 4, 5, or 6 in the pen if you don't have to. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of stress on this pitching staff, and we'll have to see how they handle it when they take on Oral Roberts. And then beyond that, hopefully, they're playing in high leverage games and winners bracket games after getting the win in that first one. And the lineup, Braden Taylor didn't have his best weekend. Trey Richardson came back to earth in a big way. Cole Fontenelle was outstanding. Anthony Silva was great. Carson Bowen had some nice ABs. And I think going into the CWS, after getting it done against a really good Indiana State team. That was a really good Indiana State pitching staff. They were very effective. They had some good arms, some good starters that kept this team off balance. Looking at the numbers, and I'm going to dive into them more, as the week goes on, but Oral Roberts, Florida, and Virginia, not a ton of dominant arms. Some good offenses, some good pitchers, but none of them necessarily have just that shutdown ace that TCU has been known to run into in Omaha in the past. In the past, and I said this yesterday. I think it is the more manageable of the two sides of the bracket. They still got to go win the games, and that's tough to do. But I am hopeful that TCU can get it done in game one, and then beyond that, we'll have to see how it plays out. But 1 p.m. start on Friday afternoon, going to be a hot one. Both teams will be prepared for that. Oral Roberts coming from Oklahoma, and TCU being in so many hot games, on Saturday and Sunday afternoons in Texas. That's not really going to affect either team. Should be a fun one, and it's great to talk about TCU playing in Omaha again. We'll get to some viewer questions and comments next. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. Final segment for you here on Locked On Horned Frogs, and had some feedback from yesterday's show, so I wanted to tap into that. Jacob Langford said, unreal that this team made Omaha. Lineup has been amazing recently. Everyone settled in their positions and hitting order too. Yeah, they really did. I mean, it came together in a big way. Kirk Sarloos mentioned this post-game after sweeping Indiana State. He said one thing that was really effective for that bullpen is as the year went on, guys kind of settled in their roles. And I talked about in the last segment, I think also, to be honest, the bullpen kind of shrank a little bit too. Like he was just using less guys. But it was pretty clear, okay, who's going to be, your middle relief in game one, who's going to be there in game two, who are your situational guys, who's your closer. And so when that started to fall into place, I think it helped the mentality of this group. And the lineup's been great. TJ Bruce took some criticism early in the year, but I feel like he's really caught his stride, and his team has caught their stride as the year has gone on. Brian Caper says, unbelievable. This lineup is like the 27 Yankees. It certainly wasn't Fayetteville. I mean, it came back down to earth when they got back to Lupton and took on Indiana State, but they had got runs in key moments. They had some big innings, and they did what they had to do to keep it moving. Tanner McKinney said, I truly think Cam Cook will be an X factor, maybe not his freshman season, but I think he can have Kendra Miller numbers or better. Man, that would be great. If he comes anywhere close to what Kendra did in his career, and we're talking about an outstanding running back. It's hard for me to picture Cam being super effective, at least at the beginning of the year, just because he wasn't there in spring ball. Now, running back is one of those positions that you can adjust to pretty quickly. It's not like O-line or D-line where the physicality is such a big, huge step up. Your responsibilities are pretty similar. Once you learn the offense and kind of get a handle on it, it is, a position where you can be effective immediately. I'm not sure where Cam's going to fall in the pecking order in that running back position, but I do like him as a prospect, and I agree with you, Tanner. I think he's going to be an effective player for TCU one day. Zoom Play said, Omaha, here we come. That's right. Frogs headed to the College World Series. Jesus Patino said, yes, that offense reminds me of the Texas Rangers. Has been fun watching the Rangers be a good team this year as well, and it's nice having both my baseball teams have great seasons so far. And then Jack Daddy Slim, one of the great usernames on YouTube, said, Steven, could you explain to me why TCU as a Big 12 school doesn't field the girls softball team? I understand it would take a lot of capital up front to create one now, but TCU needs a women's softball team. What do you think about that? So my understanding is it has to do with Title IX rules in making sure that there's an even number of men's and women's sports on campus. If I'm wrong about that, please feel free to interject in the YouTube comments or let me know on Twitter. Softball is a great sport. College softball is a lot of fun. I watched some of the College World Series this year. Oklahoma's obviously a super dominant team. They'll be leaving the SEC soon. I'd love to see softball on TCU's campus. I know there's a lot of people that would. It does feel like a sport. I know Clemson and Duke recently started programs, and both of them were in the super regionals this year. It's one of those sports that it seems like if you invest in it and you're willing to invest in it, then you can get pretty good at it pretty quickly. But for whatever reason, it's not one that TCU has explored. And again, I think it has to do with Title IX regulations. I haven't heard of any plans for them to start a softball team anytime soon, but yeah, I would definitely welcome that. Because be more sports to talk about. This is Locked On Horned Frogs. Thanks for listening to the show. Thanks for participating in the show. It is your team every day.